I read 20 books in August and September. Let's talk about them. In August and September, I read a total of 6,390 pages. 6,390 divided by 61. That's an average of 104 pages a day. So we had 6 romance books, 3 YA fantasy, 3 mystery thrillers, 2 fantasies, 1 mystery, 1 YA mystery, 1 literary fiction, and 1 YA fiction. And 2 of those books were audiobooks, and 1 was a DNF. We've got a lot to cover, let's jump right in. So the first book that I read was The Siren by Kiera. This book follows Kaylin, who was on a boat with her family when the boat started sinking and she was like on the verge of death, when the ocean came to her and gave her a proposition that said, I will save your life in exchange for 100 years of servitude as a siren for the ocean. Kaylin is 80 years, I think, into her sentence when she meets a Kinley, who immediately captures her heart and begins to cause problems in her life concerning her servitude and everything. You know, she's supposed to be serving the ocean and not really making any connections, because then the ocean feels bad about tearing them away from their lives and whatever. This is Kiera's debut novel, and it definitely reads like that. There were a couple of things that kind of weirded me out in this book. First off, the characters had very strange names. A Kinley? The only thing that I could think of was the Akinator from when I was in middle school and would try to beat it, you know, and keep it from guessing what character I was thinking of. And then the way that Kiera chose to personify the ocean was a bit strange. Like, Kaylin gets upset, and so she runs to the ocean for comfort, and then it says something like, and then I stepped into her. And I was like, that's a bit weird. Why did you choose to phrase it like that? That's weird. And so there were things like that that kind of like pulled you out of the story, that really just kind of like showed you that this was in fact her debut novel, and you didn't see these problems with like the Selection series, which is what she's mainly known for. And so I could see like how she'd grown from the Siren to writing the Selection series. The ending was kind of underwhelming, not gonna lie, but Kaylin and a Kinley were very cute, but overall I'm not really sure I would recommend. I gave this 3 stars. Then I read Full Measures. This one follows Ember. The book starts off when she has just learned that her father has been killed in action in the Middle East, serving in the military. Being the oldest of 3 children, and her mother has kind of become bedridden in her grief, it now falls onto Ember to keep the family afloat. And in comes Josh Walker, who is immediately infatuated and obsessed with Ember. But she is like, dude, no, I literally like have all of these people relying on me for survival, and I'm trying to go to school full time. I have a job. Like, I cannot deal with you over here right now because I have these other people who need me. So this is Rebecca Yarros' debut novel. Rebecca Yarros also wrote Fourth Wing. She does write quite a bit of like contemporary romances, a lot of military romances. I have read 3 of hers, and they've all been military romance. Full Measures, In the Likely Event, and Eyes Turn Skyward. This book is the first book in the Flight and Glory series. It's a 5-book series. They're all military romances. So keep that in mind if you decide to add this book to your TBR. I thought it was interesting that she chose to write this book about a family that is struggling because their father was killed in action. Because I follow Rebecca Yarros on Instagram, and I know that her husband, he had a career in the military. I feel like I personally wouldn't choose to write about a situation that could have become very real for me. So I thought it was interesting that she decided to gear this book around that type of event. The romance was very cute, but it is an open door romance, and so was spicy. And I think that definitely lowered my rating a little bit because I gave it a 3.5 stars. Then I read These Deadly Prophecies by Andrea Tang. It definitely gives Knives Out vibes, which is what I was going for when I picked this book to read, but this follows Tabitha, and she is the apprentice to one of the most famous sorcerers in the world. Well, then he turns up dead, and Tabitha has become one of the biggest suspects in his death. And so she teams up with his youngest son to try to figure out who or what killed this guy, her master, her teacher, her whatever you would call it. The banter on this one was so good. If you love banter, you should definitely read this book. I really enjoyed it. It definitely gave the Knives Out vibes, which is what I was looking for when I went into this book, and I really enjoyed it. It definitely had a little bit more action than Knives Out, since there was sorcery and magic. You know, there's obviously gonna be a little bit more action involved, but not too much, but it's definitely there. I gave this a 4 stars. You should definitely add this to your fall TBR. Then I read Stalking Jack the Ripper by Kerri Maniscalco. This one I was severely disappointed in. Now I do have to say I went into this book hoping it was going to be like the movie Enola Holmes with Millie Bobby Brown, and in some ways it did, but in a lot of ways it didn't. And so I feel like that probably had a pretty big part in why I was so disappointed with this book, because the romance was definitely not the same as the romance you get in Enola Holmes. This book follows Audrey Rose, and she lives in the 1800s probably, and she desperately wants to become a medical examiner. But you know, this is the time when girls are supposed to go to finishing school, they're supposed to learn to be proper, they're supposed to just kind of like gossip at tea around the rest of the other girls, and that's just supposed to be that. And so it's definitely a big no-no for her to become a medical examiner. But she has a really good relationship with her uncle and has been learning under him along with his apprentice, Thomas Creswell. And now they are trying to figure out the identity of Jack the Ripper. This book was underwhelming. It moved at a very slow pace in the romance. The romance was not what I was expecting, even if I feel like I took away the Enola Holmes aspect of it. There really wasn't that much action that showed that the characters cared for each other. You really didn't know about the characters' feelings until they spoke it out loud towards each other. So, and like the way that they treated each other did not allude to the fact that they were absolutely hopelessly in love with each other, which was annoying. It was also a lot more graphic about the bodies and like the medical examiner part of it than I would have liked in this book. You know, full on talking about like the main character sticking her hand in the chest cavity of a dead body. Like, not so much. So I gave this book 2 stars. Then I read Bourne and Tributary by Lisa T. Bergren, which is the 4th book in the River of Time series. It is 2 separate novellas, and oh my gosh, they were so cute. I mean, I feel like novellas kind of get a bad rap for being a little bit more like slice of life, like not super interesting, but this still had action in it. I loved it, loved it, loved it. Overall, the River of Time series follows Leah and Gabby, who are the daughters of archaeologists who have gone to Italy for their mother to go to this new archaeology site. And on the site, they find a time-traveling tunnel that takes them to 14th century Italy with some pretty cute knights. And basically the series is following them like trying to survive and like incorporating their 21st century ideals and habits into 14th century Italy and like figuring out how to find a balance between them. And in this book, you get to see more of Leah, because the first 3 books focused more so on Gabby. Leah was very much a side character, but this one of these novellas focused a lot more on Leah, which was super fun because I love her. She's super sassy and she can shoot a bow and arrow. Like, I mean, everyone loves a good archer, so I love this series. This is 100% a 5-star series for me, and I love these novellas. They're super cute. So you should go read the series. You really should. Then I read Powerful, which is book 1.5 in the Powerless series. This book follows Adina, who is the best friend of Peyton. She is the main character in the Powerless books. And the events of this book take place at the same time that the events of Powerless did. Now, if you've read Powerless, you know how Powerful ends. And I thought that knowing how Powerful was going to end would make it easier to read. It did not. If anything, somehow it made the ending hurt worse than I thought it was going to. Somehow, in less than 200 pages, Lauren Roberts built these 2 characters, Adina and Mac, and made me love them and then tore my heart to pieces. And I don't know how she did it in that short amount of time. 5 stars. Then I read The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. I was very much in my thriller era when I read this book, and I did not see the twist coming. I could never have guessed the ending from when I started the book. Never would have crossed my mind. But keep in mind, that happens to me quite often. The twists and foreshadowing and anything just kind of goes over my head. So take that fact with a grain of salt. But I did enjoy this book. I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Princess in Love by Meg Cabot. This is the 3rd book in the Princess Diaries series, and these books are just so fun. They're so low stakes and just so much fun to read. Because Meg Cabot has truly captured the train of thought of a young teenage girl and put it into these books. And you know, the unhinged thoughts that you have in your head and the conversations that you have with yourself are hilarious. And to read them is just such a fun time. And these books always have me dying laughing. And it's a really great palate cleanser amongst all the intense books that I love to read. 3 stars. Then I read The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager, once again in my thriller era. This book follows Emma. When she went to summer camp many years ago, the 3 other girls that she shared a cabin with went missing one night, and she was the only one left. And so now 15 years later, she has been invited back to that same camp as an art instructor. And she takes the gig because she thinks by going back to the camp, she will be able to figure out what happened to the 3 girls. This book was crazy, okay? This book didn't just have one twist. It had several twists, okay? I was trying to explain it to my mom last weekend, and she just looked at me like, what? It was all over the place. But reading it, it was good. I really enjoyed this book. 4.5 stars. And Riley Sager has become a new autobiographer for me. I have one of his books on my little shelf right here. Then I read House of Roots and Ruin, which is the 2nd book in the Sisters of the Salt series. This one was not what I was expecting. It was very gruesome in its descriptions of certain things, and a lot more than I was expecting. Yes, I know, okay, this book is a dark fantasy, and I knew that going into it, but so was the first book, and I do not remember the first book being as gruesome as this one was. But it has been probably 9 months since I read the first one, so it very well could have been just as gruesome, and I just don't remember it. 2.75 stars. Then I read Eyes Turn Skyward, which is the 2nd book in the Flight and Glory series, so it's the next one after Full Measures. This book follows Paisley and Jagger. Jagger we met in the first book in Full Measures, and Paisley, she has a heart condition, the same heart condition that killed her older sister, and she is really struggling to find ways to live rather than just survive. You know, everybody in her life treats her as if she should be wrapped up in bubble wrap and left in bed all day. But she's like, no, like, I have to live. Why live this life if all I'm gonna do is just look around every corner and worry about every little thing that I do is going to set me over the edge and get me killed like it did my sister? And so then Jagger comes along and maybe he helps with that. Maybe he helps her live a little. This book was interesting for a different reason than you would probably think, because this book made me realize what the definition of open door romance really is. Because it wasn't until I read this book that I understood that a book that is described as open door romance means that the book is going to have spicy scenes described in detail in it. But it also leaves the door open for the authors to include spicy elements in the characters' everyday conversation. And those you can't anticipate, and they make it difficult to skip them because they're just dropped in the middle of the chapter that you weren't expecting, and it's also surrounded by important information to the plot. And so it was with this book that I realized that I don't really want to read open door romances anymore. So those were the 11 books that I read in August. Now let's move on to September. The first book of September was It's All Relative. This book drove me absolutely mad. Okay, this book was so irritating, but this book was really aggravating. This book follows Helena. Her mother is getting remarried, so she travels to this island where the wedding is going to be taking place because she needs to spend more time with her soon-to-be stepfamily before the wedding. Now, red flag number 1 is that Helena has a massive crush on her soon-to-be stepsister's fiance. So her soon-to-be brother-in-law, she has a massive crush on him and lets herself fantasize about him leaving his fiance for her. And I'm like, girl, that is a big problem. Then she drags her best friend along with her to the wedding. When they get there, they figure out that her soon-to-be stepsister is her best friend's ex-girlfriend that he never really got over, and he's been pining after since they broke up years ago in college. Now, why didn't they figure that out before they got to the wedding, you might ask? That is because Helena refuses to call her stepfamily by their real names and refers to them as the Perfects because she thinks that their lives are perfect and put together and she doesn't fit in with them. And the most upsetting part was that we got to the end of the book and there was zero character growth for Helena. Like, she exhibited such destructive behavior in her relationships with other people, and at the end of the book she kind of just looked at it and was like, well, that's just me. And like, on some level, I get it, okay? Like, you shouldn't have to change who you are to be more palatable for people to like you, okay? But when it comes to like actual destructive behavior, and like you look at that and acknowledge that as a problem, but then like refuse to fix it, like, why did you do that? This book gets a 1 star. I never rate books 1 star, but I hated this book. Then I read The Storied Life of AJ Ficker by Gabrielle Zevin. She also wrote Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow, which is a very well-known, very well-loved book. Now, I am not sure where I got this idea, but when I went into this book, I thought it was magical realism. It's very much not. It's very much slice of life, and AJ Ficker, he is not a very likable character. He is very old-fashioned, very set in his ways, and he's also very annoying about it. But I did enjoy this book, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Beyond Ivy Walls by Rachel Fordham. This book, I loved it. I loved it. It is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and we follow Sadie and Otis. This book takes place in like the early 1900s probably. And Sadie has moved to the big city to get a job to help her family because her father is injured and she needs to send them money. And Otis finds her living in his abandoned factory, and he offers her a job at his estate. And obviously, since this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, they really get to know each other. And seeing the characters really develop that relationship is something I do love to see in a romance book. And you know, I feel like this book really does a good job of it because obviously they have to really get to know each other to get past whatever it is that makes the Beast character the Beast, you know? And so I really loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. Then I read Just Don't Fall. This is a clean, fall, small town hockey romance book. This book is dual POV, and we follow Parker and Logan. Parker is the social media manager for the minor league hockey team that's in her town. Then Logan has to go play for this small town hockey team because he got in trouble and he can't be in the major leagues anymore. And they used to be pretty good friends when they were in high school, but then when he graduated from high school and went and got drafted, she got left in the dust and they haven't spoken since. But she accidentally tells her father that she's bringing Logan as her date to a gala, and now they have to kind of start fake dating, and it's super cute. And Logan is very much an acts of service guy, and I really love to see acts of service because it really shows that the characters listen to each other and take notice of the little details that they learn about each other. 4 stars. Then we have the Coven. The female main character is a witch, and she has to go to this university to learn about her magic, and the headmaster, head of the school guy, he's a vampire. But this book was spicy, and I DNF'd at 40%. Then I read The Book Swap by Tessa Bickers. Now this book follows 2 characters who are really in a state of turmoil in their lives. Their lives are kind of crumbling around them, and they're kind of like struggling to keep their head above the water and figure out what to do with themselves and how to interact with their families and just go about everyday life. And through a series of random events, they end up becoming pen pals through the margins of books that they are exchanging. And they quickly become each other's greatest confidant, the person they tell everything to, yet they don't know who the other person is. But they knew each other when they were younger and had a super big falling out and haven't spoken to each other since. I did really enjoy this book. However, I didn't necessarily enjoy it so much for the romance. I enjoyed it a lot more when I looked at it as a literary fiction with a tiny romance subplot, because with the way that the characters got to know each other, like you really didn't see them together like as a couple. So I feel like the romance just that kind of like wasn't really there all that much, but looking at it as a literary fiction made me enjoy it a lot more. 3.5 stars. Then I read Assistant to the Villain, which was so fun. We follow Evie, who needs a job, and she ends up getting the job as the assistant to the villain of the land in which they live. And it is just so funny. Evie has the most unhinged thoughts, and somehow the thoughts that she vocalizes are more unhinged than the ones that she keeps in her head. And it was just so funny. Literally had me dying laughing. I was reading this book on TikTok Live doing reading sprints, and I literally had to like stop and just laugh because the book was so funny. It was so funny, and I had an absolute blast reading it. And so I cannot wait for my Libby Hold to come in for Apprentice to the Villain. 4 stars. Then I listened to Run Rose Run by Dolly Parton and James Patterson. This book follows Annie Lee Keys, who has gone to Nashville and she is trying to make it in the music business, but she's also hiding from some ghosts in her past. I love this book. This was my 3rd time listening to the audiobook. If this book sounds like your kind of thing, I highly recommend the audiobook because it has a full cast of characters, and Annie Lee Keys is narrated by Kelsey Ballerini, and Ruth Anna Ryder is narrated by Dolly Parton herself. And obviously that character is based on Dolly Parton. And it's just so fun, obviously. I've listened to it 3 times. 5 stars. Then we have come to the last book that I read in September, which was The Locked Door by Frida McFadden. Now, Nora Davis is the daughter of a very prolific serial killer, but he was caught in her youth, and since then she has gone on to make a name for herself as a surgeon. You know, as much of a name for yourself as you can make, knowing that you come from the DNA of a murderer. But suddenly, bodies have been showing up in the same condition as her father's victims did, and they all seem to have a connection to Nora. It was very quick, kept my attention. It did get quite graphic at some points, so be warned if you decide to pick up this book. But I enjoyed it. 3 stars. So those were the 20 books that I read in August and September. Now that we've kind of caught up, I'll be back to my regularly scheduled monthly wrap-ups. Anyways, guys, that is all I have for you guys today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up to let me know that you guys enjoy this type of content. Comment down below your favorite book that you read in either August or September, and subscribe to my channel for more bookish content in the future. I hope you'll have a lovely rest of your week, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.